You get that ink from a Pinterest board, sweetheart? The voice was young, sharp, and marinated in the kind of arrogance that only comes from being the best and knowing it. Lennox Storm didn't look up from her coffee. She was 36 years old, and the simple act of stirring a single sugar cube into the dark liquid deserved more of her attention than the pair of mountains standing over her booth. She could feel their presence, the sheer physical density of them. They were big men, carved from granite and confidence, wearing civilian clothes that did a poor job of hiding their occupation. Special operators. She'd know the type anywhere. The one who had spoken, a man with a hard jaw and eyes that missed nothing, leaned forward, planting his palms on the table. His knuckles were scarred, his forearms roped with muscle. "I'm talking to you." The tattoo. He gestured with his chin toward Lennox's left forearm, which rested on the worn vinyl of the diner tabletop. The second man, quieter and with a more thoughtful expression, nudged his partner. "Cutler, leave it alone." Cutler ignored him. "I'm just curious what it's supposed to be, some kind of fashion statement, you see it in a magazine?" He smirked. "What is it? The Girl Boss Warriors Club?" The diner, a cozy place called the Scrambled Egg, just a few miles from Fort Liberty, had been humming with the quiet breakfast rush. Now a pocket of silence was expanding from Lennox's booth. The waitress, Sarah, a woman in her 50s with a perpetually tired but kind face, froze with a coffee pot in her hand. Regulars who knew Lennox, the quiet woman who came in for coffee and wheat toast every Tuesday and Thursday, shot nervous glances at the two imposing men. Lennox took a slow sip of her coffee. She placed the mug down with a steady hand. "It's just something from a long time ago." "A long time ago," Cutler mimicked, drawing the words out. "What, like 5 years? You serve? What were you, admin? Maybe logistics? Pushing paper at some FOB?" The condescension was thick enough to be a physical force. He was testing her, prodding her, enjoying the perceived power dynamic. He and his partner were the tip of the spear, the most elite fighting force the world had ever known. This young woman was just, what? Someone playing dress-up with military aesthetics? "Something like that," Lennox said, her eyes drifting toward the window as if the conversation was already a distant memory. This infuriated Cutler. He expected deference, or at least a flicker of intimidation. He was getting nothing but calm indifference. "You know, we don't like it when people pretend to be something they're not," he said, his voice hardening. "It's called stolen valor. People who weren't there wearing things they didn't earn." He pointed a thick finger at the tattoo again. "That ink on your arm, I've never seen it, not in any book, not in any unit, and trust me, I know them all." The second operator, Reyes, finally spoke up. His voice low. "She's not claiming anything, man. We're on downtime. Just let her drink her coffee." "No," Cutler snapped, his focus locked on Lennox. "I want to know. I want to hear the cute little backstory that goes with your trendy tattoo. What's it mean, lady?" Lennox's gaze returned from the window and settled on Cutler's face. It wasn't a challenging look. It was a look of profound, soul-deep weariness, as if she were seeing not just this arrogant young man, but a long line of them stretching back through time. "It means something," Lennox said, her voice barely above a whisper to the people it's supposed to. Cutler laughed, a harsh barking sound. "That's it? That's all you got?" He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hiss. "I think you're full of it. I think you spent your time filing reports in some air-conditioned office, and you got that thing done at some trendy tattoo parlor to look cool. Instagram warrior, right?" The disrespect was palpable now. It hung in the air, thick and sour. Sarah, the waitress, placed the coffee pot down with a sharp clink. The cook in the back had stopped flipping pancakes. The quiet murmur of the diner had died completely. Everyone was watching. Cutler straightened up, a look of smug satisfaction on his face. He'd won, or so he thought. He'd gotten under her skin, even if she wasn't showing it. He turned to Reyes. "See? Nothing, just another wannabe." As he spoke, he made his final, critical mistake. He reached out and dismissively tapped his finger on Lennox's tattoo. The touch was light, almost casual. But for Lennox, it was like a lightning strike. The scent of stale coffee and bacon grease vanished, replaced in an instant by the thick, acrid smell of smoke and burning fuel. The clatter of plates became the distant thunder of helicopter rotors and gunfire. She wasn't in a vinyl booth anymore. She was crouched in the rubble of a compound in Syria, her face covered in dust and blood. A young officer's hand, slick with his own blood, was gripping her shoulder. "Stay with me, Storm," he whispered through gritted teeth. "Just stay with me." She remembered the flash of a makeshift needle, a shard of metal dipped in a mixture of gunpowder and improvised ink. It was done in silence, in a hidden safe house deep in a country they weren't officially operating in. A pact made between the 5 survivors of a mission that had never officially happened. The serpent eating its tail, the circle, the endlessness of their war. The star in the middle, them, the 5 points of a lonely constellation in a blacked-out sky. It wasn't a decoration, it was a scar. It was a promise. She blinked, and the compound was gone. She was back in the diner. Cutler's finger was still on her arm. Lennox slowly pulled her arm back, her expression unchanged, but something inside her had shifted. The placid surface remained, but beneath it, an ancient tide had turned. While Cutler was preening, enjoying his performance for the silent diner, Sarah the waitress was already moving. She had seen enough. Lennox Storm was more than a customer, she was a fixture. A quiet, thoughtful soul who always asked how her grandkids were doing, and left a tip that was far too generous for a single cup of coffee. Seeing her humiliated by these 2 titans of arrogance ignited a cold fury in Sarah. She slipped into the small, cluttered office behind the kitchen, closing the door softly. She pulled out her old flip phone, her fingers moving quickly over the worn keypad. She didn't call the police. What would they do? Ask the men to leave? This was a different kind of problem, one that required a different kind of solution. Her cousin Stacy worked as an administrative assistant at the JSOC command building on post. A long shot, but it was the only shot she had. No, you don't understand, Sarah insisted, her voice dropping lower. The woman's name is Lennox Storm. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I don't recognize that name. Is she a retired officer or something? I don't know what she is, Sarah said, frustration creeping into her voice. But they're mocking a tattoo on her arm. It's a snake in a circle eating its tail, with a star in the middle. The silence on the other end of the line was now absolute. It stretched for 3, 4, 5 seconds. Lennox Storm? Stacy asked, her voice tight. Yes. Now are you going to do something or not? Stay where you are. Don't let them leave, Stacy said. And the line went dead. Inside the sprawling, sterile headquarters of the Joint Special Operations Command, Senior Airman Stacy Miller felt a cold sweat break out on her forehead. The name and the symbol weren't in any official database she had access to, but she'd been working in this office for 3 years, and she'd heard the whispers, the ghost stories told by old sergeants major about the operatives who came before the official units, the ones who wrote the playbook in blood and shadow. Project Omega. General Marcus Thorne, the 4-star commander of all of America's elite special operations forces, was in the middle of a top-secret briefing with his component commanders. The room was soundproof, the air thick with acronyms and satellite imagery. Stacy knew the protocol. You do not interrupt the general during a SIF brief unless the building is on fire or World War III has started. She decided this was close enough. She walked to the heavy door, took a deep breath and knocked. A colonel with eagles on his collar opened it a crack, his face a mask of annoyance. What is it, airman? I need to speak with the general. It's urgent. It can wait, he hissed. Sir, with all due respect, it cannot. She pushed past him, her heart hammering against her ribs. All eyes in the room, the most dangerous and powerful military leaders in the country, turned to her. There, on her tanned, lightly scarred skin, was a faded tattoo. It was a simple design, a stark black serpent swallowing its own tail, and inside the circle it formed a single unadorned 5-pointed star. The lines were thick, the ink slightly blurred by time. It looked less like a proud emblem and more like something done in haste. What about it? Lennox's voice was low and steady, not soft, but measured. She finally lifted her gaze. Her eyes, dark brown and calm, held a stillness that seemed to unnerve the young operator. General Thorne looked up from the head of the table, his eyes like chips of flint. Airman, this had better be the end of the world. Stacy walked straight to him, her training kicking in. She leaned down and spoke in a low, clear voice that only he could hear. Sir, I apologize for the interruption. I just received a call from a source off post. A woman named Lennox Storm is being harassed at the Scrambled Egg Diner by 2 active-duty operators from the unit. The general's expression didn't change. He was a man famous for his composure. They are questioning her service, sir, Stacy continued, her voice trembling slightly. Specifically, they're mocking her tattoo. She paused, a serpent in a circle, with a star. The change was instantaneous and terrifying. The mask of composure didn't just crack, it vaporized. The color drained from General Thorne's face, replaced by a dark, thunderous rage that seemed to suck the very oxygen from the room. The other commanders flinched back, stunned. Thorne rose from his chair so quickly it screeched back and nearly toppled over. His voice, when he spoke, was not a shout. It was a low, guttural command that sliced through the silence. "Get my personal detail, get my vehicles now." He looked at the other men at the table. "This meeting is over." Back in the diner, the tension had reached its breaking point. Cutler, having received no satisfying reaction from Lennox, decided to escalate. His patience was gone, replaced by a mean-spirited need to see her break. "All right, princess, I think we've had enough of your stolen valor act," he said, his voice hard. He grabbed Lennox's upper arm, his grip strong. "Let's take a little walk outside. You and me, we can talk about respect." He was threatening to physically assault a woman in a public diner. A collective gasp went through the room. Relis grabbed his partner's shoulder. "Cutler, no. What are you doing?" But Cutler was beyond reason. He started to pull Lennox from the booth. It was then that the sound reached them. It wasn't the familiar wail of police sirens. It was a deeper, more ominous sound, the rumble of powerful engines moving at high speed. Heads turned toward the windows. Three black, government-plated Chevrolet Suburbans had screamed into the parking lot, executing a perfect tactical formation around the diner's entrance. Before the vehicles had even come to a complete stop, doors flew open and men in sharp, crisp service dress uniforms emerged. They were not soldiers in combat gear. They were the command security detail, serious-faced sergeants major and master sergeants, who moved with an unnerving, synchronized precision. They formed a perimeter, their eyes scanning everything, their presence turning a simple diner into a high-security zone. Cutler and Reyes froze. They recognized the vehicles. They recognized the lead NCO of the security detail. Their blood ran cold. The arrogance and bluster drained from Cutler's face, replaced by sickly pale confusion and the first icy tendrils of pure dread. The rear door of the lead Suburban opened. Out stepped General Marcus Thorne. The 4 silver stars on his collar glittered in the morning sun. He didn't look at anyone. His eyes, burning with a cold, controlled fire, were fixed on the diner's front door. He strode toward it, his detail falling in silently behind him. The bell above the diner door jingled softly as the general entered. The room was so quiet that the sound was like a gunshot. He filled the doorway, his presence sucking all the air from the small space. He ignored the stunned operators. He ignored the gawking patrons. His gaze swept the room and found the woman in the booth. He walked directly to Lennox Storm. He stopped, his polished black shoes inches from the table. Cutler still had his hand on Lennox's arm. The general's eyes flicked down to that hand, and the look in them was so venomous that Cutler snatched his hand back as if he'd been burned. Then General Thorne did something that no one in that diner could have ever predicted. He clicked his heels together, his back ramrod straight. In the greasy-spoon diner, surrounded by the smell of bacon and coffee, the highest-ranking special operator in the United States military snapped to the sharpest, most profound position of attention and rendered a perfect textbook salute to the calm young woman in the booth. Time seemed to stop. After a long moment, the general lowered his hand. His voice, when he spoke, was thick with an emotion no one had ever heard from him before. "Lennox, it's been too long." Lennox looked up at him, and a faint, sad smile touched her lips. "Marcus, you got old." General Thorne allowed himself a small, grim smile. He then turned his attention to the 2 operators, who looked as if they were about to be physically ill. His eyes were arctic voids. "You," he said to Cutler. "You questioned this woman, you questioned her tattoo." Cutler could only manage a choked, stammering sound. The general didn't wait for an answer. With slow, deliberate movements, he unbuttoned the cuff of his right sleeve. He rolled it up his forearm, past the wrist, past a thick, expensive watch. And there, on the skin of the 4-star general, was the exact same tattoo. The serpent eating its own tail, the 5-pointed star. His was newer, the lines crisper, but it was an identical match to the faded ink on Lennox Storm's arm. A wave of shock rippled through the diner. "Let me tell you who you were speaking to," the general said, his voice low and dangerous yet loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is Lennox Storm. Before there was SEAL Team 6, before there was Delta Force, there was a handful of operatives sent into the dark to do the impossible. They were called Project Omega. They were ghosts. Their missions were never recorded. Their names were never spoken." He took a step closer to Cutler and Reyes, his voice dropping even further. "This woman and 4 others were the founding members of the very tradition you think you represent." He paused, letting that sink in. In 2012, on a mission so classified it's still blacked out in every file, her team was compromised deep inside Syria. They were hunted for 2 weeks by enemy forces across 3 provinces. His voice grew even more intense. Lennox Storm carried a wounded teammate, me, when I was a young major, on her back for the last 36 hours through hostile territory to get to the extraction point. He let the weight of that statement settle over the room. Of the 5 operatives who wore this mark, only 2 are alive today. You are looking at both of them. The patrons stared, their mouths agape, looking at the calm young woman in the booth with completely new understanding. They were in the presence of a legend they never knew existed. The general turned back to his operators. The rebuke, when it came, was not loud. It was a quiet, surgical evisceration. You wear the uniform of the quiet professional. That is our creed. Today you forgot the quiet part. You forgot the professional part. You forgot that every single thing you have, every piece of gear you use, every tactic you employ, was paid for in blood by people like her. He looked them up and down with utter contempt. You forgot to respect your predecessors. You forgot everything. He crossed his arms. My office, 0500 tomorrow. Be prepared to turn in your credentials. He had just ended their careers in the elite tiers. As the 2 young men stood there, broken and humiliated, Lennox Storm finally spoke. She pushed herself slowly out of the booth, standing on steady legs. She looked not at the general but at the pale, shattered faces of Cutler and Reyes. Her voice was soft, devoid of anger or triumph. The tattoo doesn't make the operator, she said, her dark eyes holding theirs. The operator makes the tattoo mean something. All this, she gestured vaguely at the general. The uniforms, the spectacle, it comes and goes. But your character, that's the only thing you truly own. Try not to lose it. With that, she looked at her old friend. Buy me a coffee, Marcus. It's been a while. As General Thorne put a steadying hand on Lennox's shoulder, a final fleeting image bloomed in his mind. Not of Syria, but of a quiet moment after. A makeshift aid station. A much younger Marcus Thorne, his leg bandaged, wincing as Lennox herself, her hands steady despite the exhaustion, applied the last touches to the fresh tattoo on his arm with that same improvised needle. He remembered her words from that day, a decade ago. It's a promise, to remember the ones who aren't here, and to never, ever quit. Now you're one of us, for life. The fallout from the incident at the Scrambled Egg was swift and decisive. General Thorne didn't just discipline Cutler and Reyes. He saw a symptom of a larger disease, a generation of warriors so focused on the present that they had forgotten their past. Within a month, he instituted a new mandatory block of instruction for every single special operations candidate. It was called Legacy, and it was a deep dive into the history and lineage of their silent profession. The classes weren't taught by active duty instructors, but by a rotating roster of vetted veterans from Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria, operatives like Lennox Storm, who were flown in to speak directly to the young candidates, to share their stories and impart the lessons that could only be learned through time and sacrifice. Cutler and Reyes were not dishonorably discharged. General Thorne believed that would be too easy. Instead, they were reassigned. They became the permanent administrative staff for the new Legacy program, responsible for coordinating travel, setting up classrooms, and ensuring the veteran speakers had everything they needed. For the next 3 years, their duty was to serve the very people they had once failed to respect. Forced to listen to the same stories of quiet, unassuming heroism day after day, it was a subtle but profound form of penance. About a year later, Lennox was in a local bookstore, browsing the military history section, when a young man in a simple Army physical training uniform respectfully cleared his throat. It was Cutler. He was leaner, the arrogance gone from his eyes, replaced by a quiet humility. "Ma'am," he began, his voice hesitant. "Miss Storm, I don't know if you remember me." "I remember," Lennox said simply, her gaze steady. Cutler swallowed hard. "I just wanted to say what I did that day was unforgivable. There's no excuse. I was arrogant and I was wrong. I'm sorry for everything." There was no grand speech, no dramatic plea for forgiveness. It was just a simple, honest admission. Lennox looked at him for a long moment, then extended her hand. Cutler took it, surprised by the strength in her grip. "We all have things to learn," Lennox said, her voice the same quiet calm it always was. "The important thing is that you keep learning." She gave a small nod, then turned back to the books, the conversation for her already over. The quiet heroes walk among us every day. If you were moved by Lennox Storm's story of dignity and valor, please like this video, subscribe to Veterans Past Stories for more tales of courage, and share it with someone who needs to hear it.